Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on how to easily create mobile apps with Google Flutter. My name is Sarah McChesney, and I will serve as your host today. Please feel free to send us any questions during the presentation, and our expert will be happy to answer them. Our presenter has offered this up to be an interactive session. You may enter your question within the question area found in the top right-hand corner of the control panel, or if you prefer, you may raise your virtual hand to indicate you would like to be unmuted so you can speak to him directly. Please be advised this session is being recorded, and should you wish your question to be removed from the final recording, please let us know. But for now, please let me introduce you to our expert. Today's presenter is Rap Payne. He is a consultant, trainer, author, and entrepreneur who has written apps, mentored developers, and taught software development classes for many Fortune 500 companies and many government agencies in both the US and Canada. He's focused on mobile development since he started his mobile app development company, Agile Gadgets, in 2003. As a professional mentor and trainer, Rap has developed a talent for communicating highly complex ideas in easy to understand ways. And as a real-world developer, he understands the need to teach these topics using practical and realistic examples and exercises. Rap has taught over 200 courses for ProTech in his 15 years of partnering with us. With no further ado, I bring you Rap Payne.
Thank you, Sarah. What a great introduction. It's almost as if I had written it myself. All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm assuming everybody is here to learn how to create apps with Flutter. So let's talk about that. Now, before I begin, I would like to let you know that I've got a couple of links on this slide for you. The one on the left there is a link to the book. In Sarah's introduction, she mentioned that I am an author, so it's true. I wrote this book on Flutter, and some of the things that we'll be talking about here today come from the book. The examples are different, and of course, we go into clearly a lot more detail in the book than we would today. But if you want to learn more about Flutter, this would be a nice resource for you later on. But I promise you, I'm not here to sell books, so this is not a commercial. But if you do happen to want to get a copy after we're finished, then please follow that link right there. It just takes you to Amazon's page for that. The other link, the one on the right, is a link to a GitHub site, which I've created, and this is for you. This has got some starter code, it's got final solutions, and it's also got ways to connect with me if you want to. So we can put those, and maybe Sarah, if you wouldn't mind putting those into chat, especially the one on the right, that the Flutter intro. So that is, that way you can have the source code later on and you don't have to furiously be typing in or taking notes. You can just kind of sit back and watch. So here will be our plan for today. In the next hour, if this is okay with everybody, let's first of all get an idea of what Flutter is. Now, I got a feeling that if you're here on this call, you already have an idea and you're interested in learning more about Flutter. So what I'm going to do there is I'll give the introduction, but I'll also give you a few more details about how it's architected and things like that. Then let's look at some of the characteristics of Flutter. Let's see how Flutter does its thing and how it does things differently than other frameworks. And speaking of which, we'll at least explore, we'll mention a couple of other options that you have of doing the same things, of solving the same problems that Flutter solves itself. In other words, we'll do a little bit of a head-to-head comparison with some other options. And then lastly, let's go and see how we can actually create apps for iOS and Android and web, and even thick client now. All right, so if that's okay with everybody, let's kind of jump into it. All right, so let me introduce you. This is, let's say that this is the CEO of an organization, or maybe it's you for your organization, and you hear about the fact that you need a web application. So obviously, if you're going to create a web application, you need to hire a web developer, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, depending on the size of your organization. But this is a person that needs to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We can't get by without a web application. All right, but then after a few minutes, after a while that the application has been published, the web application has been published, you hear from your clients, your potential clients, that web application is great, but it would be nice if you were there in the App Store. And by the way, this is from real world experience that I've had. There was a application that I created many years ago that it was a web app, but my potential customers, they could not relate to it because they would say things like, oh, this looks fantastic, I really want to buy it, but how do I find it? It's not on the App Store. And I would have to explain to them, well, it's not on the App Store because it's not an app. It's a website. And that confused some people. So it turns out that if you want it to be on the App Store, you have to have a different skill set. So you'll need to hire somebody who, if it's going to be in the App Store, they have to know iOS, they have to know Swift or Objective-C, they have to have Xcode, they have to know the iOS framework, and they have to be part of the Apple developer program. It's a completely different skill set. So the web developer isn't going to be able to solve that, so we're now going to have to hire those people as well. So now our team has grown quite a lot. All right, so then after a little while, you also hear again now, oh, that's great that you have an iOS app, but most people they're not on the App Store. They would go to the Play Store because they don't have iOS devices. And I'm sure that many of you are saying, well, wait a minute, everybody that I know has iOS devices. But it turns out that in the United States, 65% of the phones are Apple, but internationally, 85% are Android. So it would seem that we can't really afford to ignore one or the other. And I think you could probably understand that. You've been frustrated, I'm sure, when you've gone to go get an app and it turns out that it's not in the store that you want. So we ignore either side, either iOS or Android at your peril. All right, well, to get into the Play Store, you need to hire yet another developer, somebody that knows Android, an Android developer that knows Kotlin or Java, and the two of those things don't mix, right? I hope you understand that if you know how to code in Kotlin or Java for Android, you can't just automatically code for iOS. Oh, and by the way, even if you did know both of those things, and there's a small number of developers who know both of those things, but they're very expensive and very few people. Most developers will specialize in one or the other. Even if you were to know both, you can't share code between them. So anything that you write has to be completely rewritten in the other environment. Obviously, this is a big deal. So you can't have, if you want to get in all three, the web, iOS, and Android, you can't, you basically have to hire 3 different developers. All right, so if only there were some way. Oh, if only there was some way, you know what's coming. If only there were some way for us to hire one set of developers that could code in all 3 of those environments. And the answer, of course, is Flutter. So this is what Flutter does for us, is Flutter allows us to develop for iOS and for Android, and also as a bonus for the web too. So I know that you've probably dealt with or heard of other options that will allow you to code for iOS or Android, but they don't offer a web solution as well. And by the way, in alpha right now, Flutter is even going native too. So very soon, and I don't know how soon very soon is, but very soon, you'll be able to code for not only these environments, but also in for Linux, directly running on the Mac, running in Windows, and actually currently even right now, this really isn't on the slide, but currently right now, you can write apps in Flutter that will run as a connected car app. So they run inside cars. And even right now, you can write Flutter apps that will run on your Google Home or your Google Nest Hub, things like that. So it's already extremely versatile, things that you can't get with some of the other frameworks. Now, this is not the only game in town. There are other ways that you can do cross-platform development. Like I mentioned before, you could create a progressive web app, so a PWA, And PWAs are great, but once again, they're not real apps. So people would then push back and they would say things like, well, I know about Apache Cordova or Sencha Touch framework or Ionic or even, you know, some of these other frameworks that will allow you to write web applications and have those things run on mobile devices. And that's very true. But once again, they're not true native applications. They can be accessed through the App Store, but they always run what's called a web view. And it ends up feeling a little bit clunky and it suffers from some performance. So that may not be the best option. Your third option is not progressive web apps, not a hybrid app, but a truly native solution, truly native cross-platform. So let's look at a couple of those options. Now, on this slide, the heading says, this is very opinionated YMMV. And that YMMV stands for your mileage may vary. So this is my way of saying, you may have a different opinion on this slide, and I'm just kind of being right up front with you that these are my opinions, but not just mine either. These are things that I've gleaned through lots of talking with developers, people in the community, and with reading. So these are pretty popular opinions. However, if you have a different opinion, I totally respect that. Okay, so your truly native cross-platform solutions would be things like NativeScript and Xamarin and the 800-pound gorilla React Native. So let's look at some of these options and see how what they would bring versus, say, Flutter, since we're talking about Flutter. So we'll start off with NativeScript. Now, NativeScript, I've looked at it and I really like it. For the life of me, I can't understand why it's not more popular, but all of these options, NativeScript is the least popular. Therefore, it has the least amount of support, the least amount of ability to ask questions, like it's got very few Stack Overflow kinds of answers, very few libraries out there. And the main reason why is because it's not backed by a large company. It's backed by a company called Progress Software. And I would venture to guess that not many of us have heard of that. It turns out that Progress back in 2014 bought Telerik, and Telerik is a bit more well known. But anyway, Telerik is a part. It is a part of Progress now, and they're the ones that created NativeScript in the first place. But Progress, it's not exactly a large name like Google. Okay, so there's the thing, is that this has got the lowest number of GitHub stars, the lowest number of Stack Overflow questions. It's by all accounts the least popular. Again, no disrespect to NativeScript. I think it's a terrific solution. Then there's Xamarin. And Xamarin was kind of the first mover in this space. Turns out that Xamarin is an option that was created at a company called Xamarin, which was then acquired by Microsoft, and Microsoft put their full weight behind Xamarin. So it was the first one of these places where you could write for cross-platform natively. You'll write in C#, you'll use XAML, the XAML user interface language, to create your applications. But because it's been around for so long, what I hear is that it's just kind of clunky. It's just kind of obtuse. It's not a very satisfying world in which for developers to develop in. And my experience has been exactly like that. I just leave not feeling great about it. Again, there's other people that will disagree. But regardless of who you talk to, it is true that there's less device-specific coding with Flutter. So you have to do you have to go down near the metal with Xamarin when you want to do things that are kind of outside of its norm. So that takes us to the biggest player in the space, and that is React Native. And React Native is great. But I think that you've probably also heard stories about Airbnb and Udemy that were using React Native, and they've since pulled back out because, as it turns out, they didn't have to maintain, instead of 2 code bases, they were hoping to get down to 1, but they actually had to maintain 3 code bases. The third one was React Native itself. So they had to do React Native plus iOS plus Android because there's just certain things that React Native couldn't do. And I'm here to tell you that platform channels make those things easier. But to me, the biggest selling point that Flutter has over React Native is that Flutter's tool chain is that Flutter has learned from React Native's mistakes. So the part where it's really painful to set up a project and a lot of the friction that is involved in the compiling and the creation of it, those things have been effectively solved by Flutter. So it's just a much better experience, in my opinion. So some things to ask about, some things to know about Flutter. First of all, in Flutter, they have this mantra that everything is a widget. Okay, so no matter where you go, you'll hear somebody saying that everything is a widget. In other languages and other frameworks, this would be known as a component. So if you've done any web development in, say, Angular or React or Vue, you'll know that these are component-based frameworks. It seems like the entire world is going to components, and there's a good reason. It's because components just seem to work. What you'll do in any of these languages, any of these frameworks, is that you'll create a small component, and that component will be combined with other components to form larger components. And those will be combined with other components to create even larger components. And you build it up like Legos until you get this wonderful, big, full-blown app. Each of the individual parts, the components, are easy to understand and easy to maintain, and therefore it's much more agile. Well, that's exactly what Flutter does too. It's just that they call them widgets. In fact, the Flutter team has been very forthright that they relied heavily on the React architecture when they created Flutter. So as we go through this, I'm going to show you a demo in a little while. And as we do that, what you'll see is if you're working with React, that you're going to see several paradigms that are exactly like in React, and that's not coincidence. Okay, the second thing to know about Flutter, which is a little bit surprising, is that the user interface is not expressed in a different language. It's expressed in the same language that you write the procedural code in. For instance, like in Angular. In Angular, you'll create your user interface, the thing that the user sees, in HTML. And then you'll have your procedural language in TypeScript. I mentioned in XAML, with Xamarin. I mentioned with Xamarin, the user interface is done in a language called XAML, and then the procedural language is C#, VB.NET, whatever. Okay, but in Flutter, it's all the same thing. It's all done in Dart. The presentation is separated from the procedural code in a method called build, but still, it's the same language. So you don't learn two different languages, you just learn the one language, Dart. And speaking of Dart, let's talk about Dart for a minute. If you're trying to introduce Flutter at your organization, you're bound to hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't want to use Flutter because you have to code in Dart and Dart sucks." And the fact is that Dart doesn't really suck. It turns out that Dart is a very elegant language. When somebody says that, when they say Dart sucks, what they're really saying, roughly translated, is, man, I don't want to have to learn yet another language. I already know too many languages. I don't want to have to pick up this other language. Why the heck didn't Google just choose JavaScript or something like that? And I would have a hard time disagreeing with that. I had the same thoughts myself. But if you want to use Flutter, you have to code in Dart. And as it turns out, Dart is a great language. And it's super easy to pick up too. So please don't let somebody tell you that Dart is terrible. It is really a great language. It's an elegant language. Don't worry too much about the learning curve. I'm going to show you some Dart in a few minutes and you can draw your own conclusions. But the fact is that if you know Java, you can pick up Dart in 20 minutes. If you know JavaScript, you can pick up Dart in 20 minutes. If you know both, you could probably pick it up in 10. That may be an exaggeration, but Dart is really great because it carries a whole lot of the characteristics of Java and the great things that make JavaScript the dynamic language that it is. Okay, so it's got both of those things. So let's look at just some things to know about the Dart language itself. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to prevent you from being super surprised about a couple of things. As we look at the Dart code and as we're writing some Dart to create a Flutter application, you'll see it kind of feels verbose. It's a bit more verbose than, say, Java. I find Java kind of wordy. Well, Dart is a little bit more wordy, so it's kind of verbose. Just don't be shocked by that. You do get used to it after a little while. The second thing is it is an object-oriented, strongly typed language. So it's not like JavaScript in that way, but it does have a dynamic keyword that allows you to have dynamic objects, dynamic classes, and so you do get some of the benefits of the dynamicness of JavaScript as well. So it's not, the strong typing is not always enforced. The third thing is that you can use the keyword this dot inside of a class, and when you're instantiating an object from a class, you would use the new keyword. Well, those things as a best practice are usually omitted. So you'll see it's a little bit jarring when you see it, because you know what it means. I mean, and it's never ambiguous as to what's going on there, but we're just accustomed to saying the new keyword and this dot, whatever language. And you can put them in Dart, but it's usually the best practice. The suggestion is, the style guides say omit them. Dart provides for named parameters, and I'll show you an example of that in just a minute, as well as anonymous inline functions. These things would be known as lambdas in some other languages, and well, you'll see. It's just a very brief way of writing a function. Borrowed from the world, I mean, Java's got them borrowed from the world of JavaScript. All right, so let me show you an example just so you kind of get an idea of what Dart might look like. Now, if it's okay, I'd love to see if I could get a volunteer. Is there anybody out there, I'm going to look at our attendees, is there anybody out there that already knows Java and JavaScript? All right, I'm not seeing anybody except the organizers. Okay, well, I was hoping to get a volunteer, but that's okay. I'll just do it myself. What you're seeing here is clearly it's a method. It's a function called makePerson that receives in just an integer as an ID, and it's going to return back a person. You'll notice inside of here, the first thing that we're doing is we're instantiating a person object. So instantiating person class into an object, we're storing that in P. You'll also notice that evidently our person class receives in 3 parameters by default. It receives in an ID first, and then maybe a first name and a last name. And you can see that because we say this dot, that's implying that this function is somewhere inside of another class. It's got a property called F and a property called L. Those are first name and last name. Then it looks like we're assigning dot do something to this dot sum func. And this would be us saying, I want to add some new capabilities to the person class. It's going to do something arbitrary. But this is something that you would probably not see in Java, but we do this in JavaScript all day. Okay, so this is just adding, it's assigning some functionality to do something. And then we're returning that person. Okay, should be a piece of cake for you guys. All right, so let's see, and by the way, this is Dart code right here. But if we rewrote this thing slightly, what you might see is something like this. And let me point out the differences here. So we're just comparing these two, which they essentially do the same thing. First of all, please notice that when we're instantiating that person, that we're not saying first colon this dot F and last colon this dot L, right? So since we're not saying that, it's okay. It just shows that it's okay to omit the this dot. Like I said, it can be jarring, but it wouldn't take you but a moment to find out that that's what F and L were. They're parts of this class. Then you notice that if we use named parameters, they can be in any order. So the ones up here at the top, they're obviously positional. The first one has to be an integer, the second one has to be a string, the third has to be a string. But over here, we now have the freedom, because they're named parameters, that you can place them in any order. And by the way, in Dart, as you're writing your methods, your constructors or whatever, you have the opportunity to make them named parameters or positional, either way that you'd like. You can see here that, not that we would do this in the real world, but you can say that I want make person to receive back, to return back in anything. We can see here that it probably should be returning back a person, but just by instead of using the person keyword, we can say dynamic, and now we have the ability for this to return back anything we'd like, anything at all. Notice that we have here that arrow function thing. This is an anonymous inline function. So we said p.do something, whereas up here we said it's going to equal this.sumfunc. In this, we're putting the functionality right in line with the code. So this is just a different way of writing function. Those of you who know JavaScript, you are very comfortable with this. Okay, and lastly, please notice that when we instantiated the person, we omitted the keyword new. So, like I said, this can be a little bit jarring for some people, but those are just some strangenesses, I suppose, of Dart, how Dart behaves a little bit different. Okay, so let's take a look at some actual, let's take a look at some actual Dart code. Hang on. There we go. All right, I'll move that down here. Just kind of get it out of our way. All right, and right here we have, this is the IDE, this is Visual Studio Code. As a Dart developer, as a Flutter developer, you can choose either Visual Studio Code or you can choose Android Studio, and IntelliJ also works and all that. In fact, you can use any IDE that you want, quite frankly, but most developers will either use Visual Studio Code or Android Studio IntelliJ. So here we are in Visual Studio Code, and if I'm going to create a new Flutter application, I'll say Flutter create, and let's create a to-do app, a task app. So we'll call it, okay, task app. Why not? So what we're doing here is we're just creating the initial Flutter application. Now notice there that it created these tasks, and now it's saying all done, but then the cursor is just kind of sitting there staring at us. What's going on at this point is that it is running Flutter Doctor. Flutter Doctor is a tool which is installed with the Flutter tools, which just basically goes out and checks your entire tool chain. Flutter Doctor checks to make sure that everything is installed properly and configured properly, and so at any time you can run Flutter Doctor. Please notice that now the Flutter Doctor ran and it says yes, everything is good. That's what all of our check marks are, and this is an amazing tool. This is one of the major things that Flutter has over React Native. Now, since Flutter created this and called it Flutter Doctor, React Native now has their own version, which they've called originally React Native Doctor. So it seems like these frameworks are all borrowing from one another, and each time they borrow from it, they try to improve it. So competition is a good thing. Okay, so it's telling us here that if we want to run our app, we will cd to task app and then go Flutter run. So I am going to cd to task app. Actually, I created this on the desktop. I'll tell you what. Let me try a different way. I'm going to drag our application into code. Let's see if I can find it. It's on my desktop somewhere. There it is. So I'm just dragging this into Visual Studio Code, which will open it. All right. So right here we have this is our Flutter application. And you can see here, there is a folder for Android-specific code. There's a folder for iOS-specific code. There's a folder for web-specific code. And here we go in lib. This is where all the action is. This is where all of your source code is going to live. And they start us out with this boilerplate, which is a main file. course, this is the main entry point of our application. And notice that it is a Dart file, so it's Dart code. This boilerplate, you know what? I'm just gonna run it. So here is main.dart. Let me run this thing, and I'm going to tell it I want to run it on my iPhone simulator here. Please notice that if I click down here in iPhone X simulator, I have a choice. I could run it in Chrome on the web. I can spool up a node server and run it from the node server. And right here, I've got like I have installed 6 or 7 different Android emulators. But we'll do it with the iPhone since that's the one that's already up there. I'm going to click right here to begin debugging, and I'll just say run and debug. All right, so you notice that as it's debugging, it's telling us that it's launching. It's going to launch the iOS simulator, and it will tell us that it is compiling for iOS, and then it'll tell us that it's deploying. And the first deploy obviously takes a few minutes because that takes a while for it to create because it's actually using Xcode behind the scenes. So let me walk you through the code itself while we're compiling and deploying. All right, so you'll notice here that we start off with a main, and in main we're going to run a run app, which is going to instantiate and run my app. Please remember that the new keyword is often omitted, but this is the same thing. So we're running a new instance of my app. Turns out that my app is in the same file. And my app has got a build method with a ton of comments here. Tell you what, let me clean out some of these comments just to kind of get out of our way. And you can see that we've ended up with a pretty simple application right here. This thing is just it's got a material app, and this is a widget. Inside of that, it's got a theme data widget, and inside of and then it's got another widget called My Home Page. Well, My Home Page is itself another widget that we've created, and that's this thing down here. Okay, so again, this is just the boilerplate code. But this kind of illustrates the fact that your application is made up of widgets, which are made up of widgets, which are made up of widgets. So, like they said in Flutter, everything's a widget. In this My Home Page here, I'll just show you just real briefly what it does. This is a stateful widget. Wait, let me show you. There it is. It is a stateful widget. Those of you who have done React development, that you know you have stateful components and stateless components. This is like a stateful component. All right, this stateful component means that it can maintain its own state. And I'm really not crazy about the way that this part was designed, but you'll have 2 parts to your stateful widget. You've got the stateful widget itself and then a state class. They always go hand in hand, they always go in pairs. So here we go. In here there's a build method, regardless of whether it's stateful or stateless, we have a build method. And the build method just says, what should the user interface look like? So if you're ever looking for what the UI should appear like, it would be found in the build method. In this build method, it's returning a scaffold, which is, you guessed it, a widget. That the scaffold, it has an app bar, that's the title bar sort of at the top of your screen. And then it's got a body, which is the stuff in the middle. And every scaffold has the opportunity to have let's see if it's in here. Yeah, a floating action button. That's that button that's in the lower right. You don't have to have those, but you oftentimes do. All right, looks like our app is ready to go. And there you go, just putting you right back at the top of the build. So you can see this is the scaffold page, the boilerplate page that comes out. And as you're interacting with this thing, you can click the plus sign there, ready, set, click, and you see that it increments something, and I click it a bunch of times and it keeps incrementing those things. Okay, yay! It's your boilerplate stuff, so it gives you a place to start, a nice place to learn too. Now, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We do have a question that came in a few moments ago. Would you like me to hang on to it for a little bit, or would you like to hear it now?
Oh, let's do it right now. This would be great.
Okay, excellent. Somebody has asked, can you run iPhone simulators on Linux, or do you need a Mac?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, you need a Mac. So, yeah. But don't get mad at Flutter for that. That's an Apple thing. You can thank Steve Jobs for that one. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, if you're going to develop for iOS, you can actually develop for iOS on any machine, Windows, Linux, it really doesn't matter. But if you want to run the simulator, it's got to be on a Mac. Sorry. Thanks, Apple. Okay, so remember that just a few moments ago we went through and that it took a long time to compile. But Flutter, because it uses Dart, and there's some certain characteristics of Dart that allow it to be compiled very, very quickly. So you'll notice here that that even though that compile took a long time, it looks like here our theme is going to be a blue theme. But if you wanted to change that, you could change it to any of a handful of different themes. Like here, so I go colors green. Now watch this. When I save it, I'm just going to hit Command S to save it. And when we do, keep your eye on the simulator. Ready, set, go. I save. And it turned green, okay? This is the part where you're supposed to go, oh my gosh. This is called a hot reload, and it does this because Dart is not only has an ahead of time compile, but it also has a just-in-time compile. And when we're working in development mode, it uses the just-in-time compile. So you can go through the development cycle very, very quickly. It's just a delight to work in, I'm just telling you. Okay, so how about let's do, we've got about 23, 24 minutes. Is that right, Sarah? Is that about correct?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay, good. So let's use that 22 or 23 minutes to write a little bit of a Flutter application. So I'll tell you what, we said we're going to create a to-do app. So let me first add a new thing. We don't want to run my home page there. We don't want to run their boilerplate. So let's go, and in lib, I'm going to create a new file, and let's call this file to-do app.dart. So this will be the starting point for our application, not the main entry point, but the starting point. And in here, we have to do some imports. So I'm going to import material. Let me move this out of your way just briefly, just so you can see what it says. It's package material.dart. Okay, and then I'm going to create, let's make this first one a stateful widget. Okay, I'm just using some IDE shortcuts that allow us to create the kind of the scaffold of the class itself. So in here, this is a to-do app. Okay, and as I mentioned, the stateful widget is two parts. It's the widget itself, and then a private state object, state class. You'll get used to this after a while, don't worry. This looks a little bit daunting, but it's really not bad once you get used to it. Okay, and heck, I could just actually, I'm going to save this, which will refresh, but we won't see any differences until we bring in our to-do app. So instead of showing a My Home page, let's show an instantiation of to-do app. Now, clearly at this point, first off, we can't do anything with this because to-do app is not known. So no worries. We're simply going to import that right here at the top. I'm going to import to-do app.dart. I'll hit save, and we're going to see our to-do app right here. So that's it. Pretty boring so far. There's just nothing in it. Also, let me remind you, I just put the new in there just to kind of acclimate you to this, but remember that new, it's preferred to not have the keyword new. So whenever you see this kind of idiom here, you really are, you can mentally, for a while anyway, you can just insert the keyword new and that'll help. So this is really return new material app, return new theme data. You get the idea. Okay, so great. So here is our to-do app, and let's actually have it have some stuff in it. So our to-do app here is returning an empty container. Let's have it in fact, at the start of every page, at the start of, page, at the start of every scene, we should have a scaffold. This creates the structure of your page, if you will. And a scaffold should probably have an app bar. It just looks nice if it has an app bar, which will be a new app bar. And that new app bar will have a title, and that title will be some text. And let's have this thing be, well, this will be our list of to-dos. We'll say all my tasks. Why not? Okay. In addition to our app bar, let's also give it a body. And the body will be, okay, what would be nice? Well, we'll just make the body just for now, just for presentation purposes. We'll just put a hello world in there. And let's also give it a floating action button just so you can see what that looks like. And the floating action button should have it should have something in it. So we'll give it a child, and that child will be an icon. And let's make it be a, let's see, oh, a plus. How about add? There we go. Yeah, we'll make it a plus sign because we'll use it to add a task later. Okay. Okay, that looks good. Oh, floating action button is telling us that we've forgotten, we need an on pressed. Of course, if you have a button, you want to tell it what to do when you press it. So I'm going to give it an on pressed. Now, on pressed, those of you who come from JavaScript world, you'll recognize on pressed should be a function. So this may be a little strange to Java developers, but JavaScript developers recognize this as, oh yeah, that's just a method. So we're going to add an on pressed method. Okay. And let's see, I'm returning all of this scaffold. So what's being returned from the scaffold? Looks like I've got one too many semicolons in there. There we go. Okay, I'm going to hit save real quick and we'll watch the refresh show up. There you go. So it's got an app bar that says all my tasks. It's got a floating action button with a plus sign in it, and it's got a text that says hello world. Tell you what, just to prove the point, let's have on pressed do something. We're just going to have it, let's have it print, I got pressed. We'll save that. I'm going to hit the button a couple times. Now you didn't see it refresh because we didn't change anything in the user interface, but I'm going to hit plus, ready, set, go. See, I got pressed. And each time I click it, I'm getting a new I got pressed in the debug console. So perfect. Okay, I think we want more than just a hello world in here. So let's put inside here, instead of a hello world, let's see. Let's have a list of things. So I'm going to put we want a list of to-dos. Now, I could put it in a column, but a column is going to be, is when you put one thing on top of another in Flutter. But that's going to constrain our list. We want it to be kind of a scrollable column instead, and that is called a list view. Okay, so in my list view, I could have here, my list view has got a property called children, and I could put some children in here, and this would be a list of widgets. They're widgets. Everything's a widget. Okay, so in here I could have, I'll just put a couple of things just so you can see, but I'll put in the text, item 1, comma, come on you, there, copy and paste. So we'll just say that there's like 3 items in here. And again, I'll refresh, save. There you go. Okay, so we now have some items in there, which is great but let's actually make some to-dos. All right, so at this point, you would probably say, all right, so I've got these things in there, but I really want it to be a list of actual to-dos. So let's take the opportunity to exercise some of the strong typedness of Dart, and let's create a new class. So we'll create, this will be just a business class, and we'll call it, how about task? Yeah, okay, we'll call it a task.dart. So this will be our task class. So I'm just going to create a class task, and we'll give it, let's see, it probably needs an ID. So I'll go int ID. And it probably needs some kind of a description, so we'll make that a string description. And oh, whether it's completed or not. So let's make that a Boolean completed. Okay, great. So we have the shape of what a task would look like. And let's go into to-do-app.dart and let's actually use this. In the state, yeah, inside of our state, which is a class which represents the current state of our application. Let's say we're going to create a list of, oh yeah, we're going to create a list of type task. And you probably recognize this from Java, as this is a generic. So we have a list of type task, a list of tasks. We'll call this thing underscore to-dos. Yeah, to-dos. Okay, and we'll start it off with just an empty list. All right, now, task is obviously not recognized, so we have to import that. No problem. I'll import task.dart. Okay, and this blue squiggly here is just basically, it's a warning. It's not an error, but it's a warning saying, hey, you defined this thing, but you've never used it. We're about to. Let me also point this out too, that I'm sure that some of you have recognized that like JavaScript, there is no public or private or protected or package keywords. In Dart, what you do instead is you make it, if you start it with an underscore, it looks like a convention, but if you start it with an underscore, this becomes private. So it's automatically public unless you make it private by going underscore. Okay, this is why the class to-do app state is an underscore, it's private to this file. That probably strikes a couple of you as being kind of clunky, but it's not bad, don't worry. Okay, so how about this? In our to-dos, we're just going to start, of course, in the real world, we would go out to a server and we would grab a bunch of to-dos from a database somewhere, or maybe we would read it from local storage or write to local storage on your device itself. That would be a great thing. But for just demonstration purposes, let's create a hard-coded list, at least at first. If we have time, maybe we can refactor it. But I'm going to give it a new to-do, new task, yeah, a new task, okay? And this is a cool feature of Dart, that it allows you to kind of chain on properties. So I can go ID equals task number 1. We'll say it's completed equal false. And then its description would be, how about don't forget to buy lettuce at the grocery store. Okay, I love that feature. This thing is kind of a cascading operator, sort of, that it allows you to tack on properties. So, and we could even run methods from this as well. But remember, where I just put the keyword new there to remind you that we are instantiating a task, but I'm going to get rid of that again for best practices. So here goes a task. Oh, stop that. Oh, stop it. Okay, there we go. Copy, and let's put in 4 tasks. 2, 3, 4. We'll start them out as not being completed. And let's say go to the gym. No, just work out, because we may not be going to the gym in these times. Work out. And how about read about Flutter? And how about feed the pet? I don't know if you got dogs or cats or none of the above, but anyway, we'll just say feed the pet generically. Okay, so we have here a list of to-dos. And how about in here, instead of having these hard-coded values, let's say the children instead will be the underscore tasks. Is that what I called it? To-dos. To-dos. And for each one of these, let's do a map. And again, for you JavaScript developers, you're recognizing .map, especially the React developers. So this is exactly like you would do in React. So for each thing, let's see, map is going to receive in a function. And for each, say, to-do, yeah, okay, for each to-do, let's go and return a new, well, we'll start off with a text. We'll start off with a text, and the text of that text widget would be to-do dot. And please notice IntelliSense coming up, it understands that this thing is actually a task, strongly typed task. Let's put the description out there. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's see. Oh, okay, I was looking at the red squiggly, there's an error there. It turns out that map returns back an iterable, but children receives in a list. So I have to convert this iterable actually to a list. It's real simple. Just go to list, and I believe, yeah, that solved the problem. Okay, so I'm gonna hit save. Keep your eye on the iOS simulator, Command S to save, and there we go, there's our tasks. Now, one of the strengths of Flutter is that it's got tons of widgets, and it almost surprising. If anybody's here to think about, hey, I kind of know React Native, I'd like to know how Flutter is different. One of the things about React Native is, even though it's been around for years now, they've only got in the order of about 40 different widgets, and Flutter has got hundreds of widgets. So in this relatively short amount of time that Flutter's been around, they have way surpassed React Native's support, I guess, especially in terms of the components / widgets that are available. So there's lots and lots of cool things that are available, such as, let's see, rather than returning this text, I think it would look nice if we made a list tile. A list tile, let's see, I'm reminding myself by IntelliSense, it has a title, it has a trailing, which would be an icon that you could put at the end of it, and it's got a leading, which is an icon you can put at the beginning. I'll tell you what, let's see, the title, I'm looking in IntelliSense, is a widget. Okay, great. So I'm going to keep our text widget in there, but I'm going to pass it into list tile as a child. Oh, did I say child? Title, sorry, title. Okay, there we go. Looking good. All right. This is the end of a line, so I'm going to put a semicolon in there. I'm going to hit save, Command S to save. Okay, it made them a little bit spread out. And I'm going to, just because list tile is kind of all on one line, let me put it on a separate line. And also I'm going to put a comma at the end, just so we can add things to it. Dart tolerates trailing commas. In addition to the title, let's have a leading which is going to be a widget, and let's put an icon on there. Icon. And icons dot checkbox, let's see. Checkbox. Ooh, let's use these two, checkbox outline blank if it's not done, and checkbox if it is done. So outline blank would look like this. And I'm going to hit save, watch the simulator. Okay, there you go. So that looks pretty good, right? It just doesn't take a whole lot of time to create. And I'll tell you what, let's make it do something too. So I'm going to go give it an on pressed, on tap. Oh, whoops. I dropped my parenthesis there. Now, on tap, on tap. On tap, let's say when it gets tapped, let's make it do something. Let's change the to do. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, let's go to do dot completed equals not to do dot completed. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to flip it from completed to not completed. But if we're inside of a stateful widget, those of you who know React, you know that we have to run set state. So you remember me telling you that this Flutter has borrowed heavily from React. So you're all now going, wait a minute, I know where they got that from. This is exactly like React's set state. So let me hit save. And this means that every time I tap it, it's going to flip the switch on that to do, and then it's going to redraw. But as of now, we're not going to see anything different. You can see I can tap them and nothing really happens. But if I change this icon and I say, I'm going to change my leading icon to be if to do dot completed, then I want to draw up an icon that is the checkbox itself. Yeah, icon. Otherwise I want a filled in checkbox if it's completed. Otherwise, I want an empty checkbox. And this was icons dot checkbox. Otherwise, there you go. Okay. Okay, so if it's completed, draw a checkbox. Otherwise, draw a blank checkbox. Let me hit save. And there you go. Look at that. Unless I miss my guess, we can now check it and make it done. Cool. All right, now at this point, we could go on and I could create another screen to add new tasks, but I think you've got the idea that you can create some really cool looking things very quickly because Flutter is built to have a great developer experience, as well as they've got tons and tons of pre-baked widgets. And okay, so there you go. Like I said, I could go on, but we're almost at the end, so I figured let's stop and see if there's any questions. Sarah?
I have just one more question to ask you, and that is, if you were to start a new project today, would you choose iOS, Android, Flutter, or React Native?
Wow, okay. If I were to start a new project now, okay, first of all, I don't think that the right choice is iOS or Android. I think you, like I said, unless you want to alienate half the world, or more than half the world, you can't afford to do one or the other. So iOS and Android are sort of out. But it is a valid choice to say React Native or Flutter. The answer to that would be probably based upon my team. If your team is already well-versed in React, if they already know React really well, then your learning curve would be very small for React Native, and it may be worth your while to look at React Native. But that would be the only situation, because as I mentioned, Flutter has far outstripped React Native in terms of the developer experience and in terms of the support. And it's even, according to certain measures, it's even more popular than React Native now. So I thought it would take off a lot sooner, but it's really a force to be reckoned with now. So if your team already knows React, they already know JavaScript really well, maybe do React Native. But anybody else, I'd go with Flutter, easy.
Excellent. Thank you, Rap. Well, that concludes the last question for today. If you don't mind putting up the closing slide, just for, as I mentioned, that this presentation has been recorded, and we will be sending out the recording link in the next few days. But there is a screen that is going to, if you would like to explore any further training with RAP, we have some contact information and ways in which you can reach out to ProTech for the classes that he offers. And I also wanted to let everybody know that we do offer these free webinars on a regular basis. And we have another one coming up in a couple of weeks on security is the topic for the next one. But as you can see on the screen there, if you'd like to explore some other courses with RAP, as I mentioned, he's been working with ProTech doing training for over 15 years now, and he has a fabulous track record. And as you can tell from today's presentation, he is a fabulous instructor and makes some complex things quite simplified for many of us that appreciate that. So, as I mentioned, protechtraining.com's website has a number of upcoming webinars listed, as well as past webinar recordings. And this, once we have edited this version of today's presentation, that will also be uploaded in addition to being emailed to you. So other than thanking Rap very, very much for his time and his expertise today, and thanking all of you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us, we wanted to extend the thank you and wish everyone a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rap.
Bye.